audio. Test, test, test. Looks like audio is working. We're going to set this over here. No, not like that. There we go. Chat participants. This is not policing. This methods. Methods, and we are about 12 minutes out. So today will be a fun because I'm going to start doing some play today. Where's my mouse? Admit all. That is not one of them. Oh, did I put that? Yeah. All right. Hope y'all are doing well today. Phone just went off. So I thought I had this in here. There we go. There it is. Download it. Okay. Set up for my notes for today. Share your desktop. All right, cool. Now, all right. All right. Grab some more water. Thanks. You just copied the clipboard. Yeah. All right. Oh, ooh, ooh, that seems way low. Oh, cool, 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 cool. 5 minutes. Let's go into search methods. This one. Ooh, need to add in the rest of the chapters, don't I? I don't. I'll have to do that here in a little bit. Both of them stop at 7. Boop, download. And then this one. So what's going on in the world?
Real
Actually,
it has to come from organic farms. We work with 38 different farms around the world. And it has to come from organic farms to be in our products. And theirs is extracted. Not only that, but we can legally say that there's 2 full servings of fruits and vegetables in ours. None of our competitors can say that because if you're going to get a couple of capsules worth versus a big scoop of fruits and vegetables, just right there, the amount of content.
I'm gonna mute that because that has to do something with food. For a second, I had to listen. It's like, is that related to class or something? Because that could be something going on in the world. Yeah, election stuff's coming up. My first class, I played for him. Was it Steelers wheel stuck in the middle with you? Because I think that's funny because it's one of those things where everyone talks about, you know, there being 2 sides, no real middle. It's like, no, I think most everybody's in the middle. It's just trying to figure out that whole sides thing and which way is up. And ugh, I think what helps me personally is telling people how I vote. And what I mean by that is not like who I vote for, but what I do is I always make sure that I know people who are on all sides of any type of issue. And then I get to pick whose voice I get to, or whose vote I get to cancel out. And then I get to tell them that. That's always what I thought was fun about it. It's like, yeah, you're on this side, you're on this side. Who's irritating me the most? Give me that person over here, and I'm going to tell them. And then usually it's a conversation after that. Like, okay, who actually canceled out whose vote? Hot topical election. Don't forget to vote. Yeah, yeah. It's a big election, so everybody should be heard if they. All right, so we got 3 more minutes. And so today we start moving a little bit into some of that math stuff. And I need to put some of this out there because I haven't put this out there yet. I thought I had, but I hadn't for this class. Yes. So this will go pretty fast, and then we'll move into some of the maybe sampling next. See how fast that one can go. So yeah. Oh, oh, boom. All right. 2 minutes. Right on that one. 8. Oh, open it up, are you? And PowerPoint there. Bum, 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 bum. Checked out my 23andMe. Bro, check out your 23andMe. No. What's um there's a child somewhere. Golly, I love those types of things. Apparently I have a sibling somewhere. I just found that. 23. A sibling. One of my other siblings just let me know. Hey, apparently there's a love child somewhere. You seen yours? It's like, no, I haven't. Ooh. What's this? Hmm. What's the person's age? Because I can tell you everything from there. My memories pick up at like 2. Like, actually, probably before 2. I can remember changing my diapers. Yeah. Yeah, that's messed up. All right, so it is officially 1974. So that'd have been before. So that's an older sibling. Ooh, okay. Interesting. You never know. You're gonna find out. I love this class because it's the same methods I use in here is the same thing I'd be using to figure out who's that going to be pretty quickly. Like, okay, so that's going to be so and so. I'm going to go and look. Okay, so that's probably one of yeah. Okay, I can figure out pretty quickly. Let's see. So we need to move into sampling and surveys and qualitative research. So quantitative and qualitative research. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a little bit about sampling and that kind of thing. And then we'll move into survey stuff. And I've got an example. And what we'll do is we'll do it like it's something we were designing ourselves. So I'll give you the topic and then we'll get some areas and I'll show you what developed when a couple of different times that I've done this with other things. And so sampling. So the first thing to remember is whenever you're dealing with sampling is that central limit theorem. This might reference that. It might have been earlier. Let me scroll through this real quick, see what it mentions. Understand the logic. Yeah. It moves up pretty quickly. Sampling. So the reason why we sample numbers, money, and good old time. Really, or why we sample. Ooh, if you're coming in late, things going on in the world, tomorrow's election day. So if you want to, make sure you get out and vote. Voices matter. So make sure yours is heard if you want to. Also, in terms of advice, I always like to tell people how I vote. I always have people on both sides that I know, and some I like, some I don't on both sides. And so I get to pick the person whose vote I get to cancel out. And that's always a fun conversation because I usually can tell them. And then it's one of those fun gotcha moments. And then sort of like being in prison, who's trapped in with whom? Sometimes I'm not one who's, sometimes I'm the one who's trapped, I guess. I don't know. So many reasons why. Now we've talked about some of the numbers aspect of it when we deal with the math of it. The number of cases we're dealing with can affect statistical significance, the effect size, and those types of things. The numbers that we're using to some degree affect the relationships themselves. So we need to try to limit that to some degree. And one of the ways that we do that is through sampling. So we can deal with a smaller number of things and still get the same results if we were using the full set, right? Like in here, I've talked about the census versus the American Community Survey, right? The census is still like they won't have talked to every single person, right? But the efforts they go forward into the census are more intensive than the American Community Survey because the time frames, and so they use math and sampling to be able to establish the same kind of a data set that they get if they put more time and energy into it. And so you have efficiency that's coming across here to some degree too. Right? You have the steps that's like, how easy would it be to get a list of everyone in the country? It's impossible, right? How many people are here who don't want us to know that they're here? How many people were just born we haven't had time to catch up with? How many people have died? And we haven't taken notice of that too, because that takes time. Right? So there's all kinds of reasons why we can't collect everything that we want. There are some instances when we can, right? Yeah. So this next slide will talk about, oh, pardon me. No sleep is catching up with me. Okay. So the general idea is that when we sample something, we want that sample to represent the overall thing. There's a few different ways to do it, but we want it to be representative. And so the first step in that is, well, identifying your frame, your sampling frame, right? You say sampling frame, that's going to be your group of people who have a chance of being selected. Ideally, you want this. This is a best case scenario. Every member of that population is known and they have a chance of being selected. So this would be like you're doing a study. I'll give you mine because that's the one that we'll be playing with here in a little bit. We're going to do one on fear, and we're going to do it on campus, right? That's when you can get the entire sampling frame for. You can get a list of every single student, every single employee, that kind of thing. So you can have an equal chance of being selected, right? You don't have that equal chance to begin with, then there's going to be some misrepresentation, some error, some bias involved. Conscious and unconscious sampling bias. All right. So it's a proportion of students who've been to a football game, that kind of thing is the question asked here. If you're dealing with just those who've been to a game, that's not going to be representative of the overall student body because not everybody goes to those games, right? And so it's being aware of those things as they come up. When you think about the different populations involved, sometimes things like that will come. It's like, okay, are we still dealing with the same thing or did it change? And that equal probability of selection method, that's samples representative its aggregate characteristics closely match that of the populations. It's the basis of probability sampling. So that's that central limit theorem that I've mentioned before, where it's right? You've got that overall distribution. If I randomly sample, each time I sample, my mean can be any one of these numbers, just depending on what actual combination of people I get. If it's at random, eventually the average of means will reflect that of the average for the population, right? When it does, when you sample correctly, your descriptive characteristics for whatever it is in this sample will match. So you'll have, like, let's say you normally have, say, 100K people, and we only sampled 5K. But if we looked at their measures for age, the racial disproportions across the two groups, the income or crime or whatever, if it is truly random and there is no other bias that has come in, they will approximate each other. They will be really close. It won't be exact, but they'll be close. Those relationships will still be there, that kind of thing. Next slide where it gives you terminology. So your sample element, it gives you sample element, population parameter, and sample statistic. So it's probably best to kind of look at it this way, right? You have your population parameters, and you have your sample and your sample statistics, right? So your parameter is what that variable would be in the population. Your statistics, what that variable is in the sample. That sampling element is the same as your it's whatever unit you're dealing with here, right? In this case, we're dealing with students. You were surveying households, that kind of thing. So your unit of analysis and your sampling element can tend to be the same. They don't always have to be, but they tend to be.
Dr. Hurst, can you share your screen with us, please?
Oh, shoot, I thought I was already. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for noticing. No, all right, share. And you guys can still see the whiteboard too, right?
Yes, we can see it.
Cool. Hopefully it comes through big enough because I don't know how to change that. But so this is the general idea. All right, here's your terminology. Realize the population and parameter is basically the same thing as your sample and your sample statistic, right? Whenever you start dealing with, if you were actually getting to the statistics side of it, basically it's the same kinds of formulas, except for the denominator will change for the formula. So it shows that you're no longer dealing with population, but there's a little bit of an increase in that. What's up? Variance. That's the word. Okay, so purpose. You know what it is. We're trying to sample in a way to get at information for some kind of purpose. Here it starts out talking about the random side of things because of the fact that we're trying to equalize groups. There are plenty of situations where we want to have unequal groups. And so that's a different type of research kind of thing, different sampling structure, but there's a lot of variation, a lot of varieties here. Here it mentions the distribution. That again is the range, right? It's that whole shape. We've been talking about anything we see distribution, think shapes, right? Because at that point in time, it's like it's like a kid with the blocks. Star shape goes in the star hole kind of thing. Circle, cylinder goes in the circular hole. Square goes in the. Okay. Your sampling frame, the list of elements in a population, right? Increase the number of samples selected and interviewed, increase the range of estimates provided by sampling operation. So that's what it's telling you here is that when you increase your number, you increase the range of estimates. Okay. Because there is a formula, or because there's math involved and randomization is equalizing your other variables, you can actually estimate your error here. right? Get an idea for the degree to which, how would you want to word this? Because I'm going to start talking confidence intervals a little bit. Error. How much error? How close? If we were looking at this on a grid, you have these dots here, and it's created a line to try to analyze it. How close? What is that standard measure of error across those distribution points and that line kind of thing? Okay. Back and forth. So here's where it starts talking about confidence levels and intervals. So talked about the error involved. That error is that distance between the thing that we're measuring and where those points really are in reality, right? As we do the math kind of smooths everything out. It'll take those dots and put a line to it or something like that. And we use that line to project out. If our X value is this, Y is this, right? However, it is election season. So I'm going to use an example from that one. The approval ratings of candidate 1 versus candidate 2. Approval rating here is 45 plus or minus 2 and 44 plus or minus 2. What does that mean? Those plus or minus 2s are your confidence intervals, right? That's so I said 45 plus or minus 2. What that means is that you're really dealing with the numbers somewhere between 43 and 47. And there's a 95% likelihood that the real number is in there. So really what you're saying here is it's not really a real number, it's more of a cloud. Real muddy right around this line. I think it's somewhere around in here, right? And if you have to give it a center point, it's right here. And so that means is with that number of 45 plus or minus 2 and 44 plus or minus 2, that gives you anywhere from for both candidates, it's 43 to 47 versus 42 to 46. So it could be anywhere from the one with the lower score is actually going to win by 3, to the one with the higher score is going to win by 5. Right? We don't know. It could be anywhere. It's a toss-up. Right? That's what politics does. Right? If you look at those numbers, that's what they're saying there. Is those are projections with estimates that have error in them. So it's like we think it's going to be within here, but there's plenty of opportunity for plenty of wiggle room for those numbers to change, or them not to actually be presented with any, somewhere in this range. But that means the actual results, the implications for it, are unknown, right? That kind of thing. And so it gives you some confidence about those numbers that you have. And so that's how you determine appropriate sample size for a study, that kind of a thing. Okay. Here's where it talks about randomization. Yep, all statements of accuracy and sampling include both the confidence level and the interval, right? This is the interval. This is how confident you are. Okay? I am 95% certain. It's going to be within these certain range of points. That range is your interval. Okay. Population sampling frames. Different probability samplings can be used alone or in combination with different research purposes. Okay. So when we start talking about sampling, there are many, many, many different types and levels. Right, so there's a few different types, few different levels that creates many combinations is really what you're dealing with. So let me show you some of that stuff. Most simple is random. Got a group of people, going to select them at random. That's pretty nice. Get everybody in there. Create a random number generator. Select your first, what, 50, 100? Since it's at random, those earliest 10 numbers, the last 10 numbers, whatever it is, for your sample size, they're going to be in there at random. So just pick some, right? In sequence, so that it is at random. And so it's going to pick the first 50, the first 100, whatever. All right. Boom. This is simple random. Assign them a number, they're random, and then that is how we're able to get population parameters, standard error, confidence intervals, that kind of stuff. Systematic sampling. This is a little bit different, right? How many of you they do this for you guys? Probably somewhere in quick K through 12, might have been in the earlier years, could have been like junior high and high school, where they talk about let's say World War II and genocide, right? Everybody's in the room. Okay, so the genocide was this bad. It's going to be, every third person in the room is going to be dead, right? And so you live, you die, you live, you die. That's the same kind of process that they work through there to make that lesson understandable, right? Where you see it's like, okay, in this time when they were dealing with this thing, this percentage of the population died. Well, I'm going to break that up by going, every 10th person. Same kind of sampling here, same kind of process here. Darker lesson though, one we've had before. So that's why I use that. Like here it says, list of 10,000 elements, you want 1,000, so every 10th is the one they pick, right? Because it's just right there like that. It's not random, but it is systematic, right? Dangerous says period. I can't say that word. Basically, it has to do with how that data is put in there. If it's arranged in a time period kind of order, you start dealing with that as your a bias in there, right? Because those things are going to come up in temporal order, and you're taking them in temporal order. And so if time is a factor, boy, is it, you just biased it. Stratified sampling and the distribution. So systematic. Stratified. Another way to think about it is like separated out kind of thing. Here it says method for attaining greater degree of representativeness. Okay. So think about the census does this to some degree. The American Community Survey will do this. A lot of the big national ones will do this. What they're going to do is they're going to select, of course, all states, counties, maybe we'll just say neighborhoods, houses. We'll stop there, right? So as it's going through each of these different levels, it's sampling out of each of these at each step, right? And so stratified, we've got a method for sampling states. We have a method for sampling counties within states. We have methods for sampling neighborhoods within counties, and then sampling houses within those. That's going to remain consistent across all of them. Disproportionate is whenever you play with those numbers on purpose, right? The idea is these numbers represent society. It's not always what we want to do. If we want to make two groups comparable, That means we might have to take them out of disproportion, right? We want to compare, for example, we'll say, oh, we're doing a study on sexual orientation, right? So you have male, female identities, your non-traditional identities, then you have the actual orientation part, whether it's traditionally aligned or not, right? And so, if we're really trying to make those groups comparable, we need about the same number of people who also have similar characteristics across other outside friends. So when we're sampling those non-traditional people, there's not as many of those because that's why it's non-traditional. And so we would purposefully select those out of proportion so that way we could make them more comparable. But you have to have that specific purpose there. Multi-stage cluster sampling. That's where you're doing this across multiple stages. So this is what that would be. Stratified across a couple. This is where you do it, right? Compile a stratified group, a cluster, you sample it, then subsample that set. So that's where you can't get an exhaustive list. And basically, you're just going through that same process over and over again to try to, I don't want to say fill in the blanks, but that's kind of what you're doing is you're building up that framework to get that part that you can't otherwise address. And so that's a little bit about sampling stuff. And here's where they start moving into the different, and then I'll move into non-probability sampling. Big surveys here, they have the National Crime Victimization Survey. I also mentioned British survey. Basically, these are victimization surveys. How they do their sampling, it gives you an outline here, right? So we're talking, it's nationwide, and it's for person 12 and older living in households. So we don't touch the homeless population, anybody who's not living in a household kind of thing. Let's see. For 2004, you're talking 42,000 households with 74,000 people living in them, right? Spread across the nation, so that way it's representative of counties, of states across, all of those things. It says census and enumeration districts selected, right? So clusters of 4 housing units from each of these districts were selected, right? So first step, primary sampling units. Stratified by size, population density, reported crimes, and other variables into about 150 strata. I'm not going to say that strata. Oh, too fast. So that's how that works. That's how many different levels. That's why whenever I pulled up those data sets, you'd see this is DP1. This one's, whatever, S101. Each of those is a different data set that correlates to 1, a different series of questions, 2, subject matter. Let's see what else. 3, what section it's kind of dealing with. This is the British Crime Survey. Here it is for same kind of thing there. Households, 16. 1 randomly selected here. So multiple segments, all to get at what they're trying to get. If you're trying to administer a project like that, it depends on which one you want to do. That one you're dealing with less people. This one you're dealing with bigger geographic area. This is probability sampling. Because it's based on probabilities, we have math involved. We can do that. We can do probabilities. We're not, like I said at the beginning of the semester, we're not naturally good at that, but we can do the math for it and figure it out. When we start moving into non-probability sampling, this is where the disproportionate stuff starts coming in, right? There are many reasons why we would do this, but big thing is that it does not generalize like the probability sampling does. You cannot figure out your errors here. You can't determine those types of things. And so do those. Then, Generous appropriation. So propulsive quota, convenience, snowball. Those are your big ones. Propulsive. It's going to be tied into the specific purpose of your project, right? For your research study. You're the one making those decisions and it's going to affect that directly. Quota is you have a set number of people you're looking to get or number of things. Let's see. Typically, when we start looking over here and this side of things, probability sampling versus non-probability sampling, to some degree, that's going to feed into qualitative versus quantitative research. Quantitative being numbers, qualitative being more about like ethnographies. Let's see what else were examples. We're talking about qualitative, quantitative, so I'm not going to explain what those two things again. But these more heavily lean towards those qualitative studies because it's non-probabilistic. Reliance on available studies, convenience sampling, very common. Snowball sampling. That one's used in our field quite a bit. What it is you interview some individuals and then ask them to identify others who will participate in the study. And so you go from person to person asking for the next person. Why would you use that? No sampling list, sampling frame. Why is that particularly useful for our field? Think about the subject areas. People try to hide stuff. People want to hide the stuff that we deal with, right? They don't want to be on some list, right? Engaging in criminal activity, the whole idea is to get away with it, right? The best one for that one, like that, I don't say best one, I say the easiest identifiable, prostitution, right? As you're dealing with, you identify one, maybe you'll identify a few in a given area if you're studying them. And then from there, it's going to be identifying, okay, connections out here. I need to get my next subject so I can keep getting information so I get everything I need for this data set. And, well, what's the easiest way to find them? Yeah, we know they're over here. Okay. You know someone can introduce us. Great. Right. Set up an interview, that kind of a thing. Weaknesses, those you're reliant on those networks. That takes care of that one. Let's look at the next one real quick. And it's that one. And next one, survey research, right? And so that's the sampling side of things. If you're going to ask questions, you're going to try to gather information. Sampling, knowing where you're going to go and get it, right? Surveys. Surveys are one of those areas where we get them, where we can go and collect it ourselves. Right? So in terms of quantitative versus qualitative, surveys tend to be quantitative in nature. You're going to ask questions that have some type of numerical response, some type of response that can be quantified, and you start analyzing the differences there. So for this next part, I gotta sit down. It's there, stuff. Pardon me. All right. Boom. So it's going to talk about administration of surveys, the purposes here, particularly descriptive, exploratories, large populations, different types of data set you wouldn't collect officially. And here it mentions bias. Of course, there's bias in these things. How you administer the questionnaires. And anything else here? Not really. So I'm going to go pretty fast in this. So surveys are very, 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 very frequent. They're the easiest to use. They're cross-sectional in nature. They tend to be. And it's sort of like whenever we were in here at the beginning of the semester, I said, how can you tell if the room is hot? I can look over at the thermometer thing. It doesn't have a gauge on it other than the slider. Is it warm or cold in here? I don't know. I can feel the room, but is that objective? No. How do I get to an objective measure without having a thermometer? Well, I start asking everyone in the room and I compile all their interests, right? I start looking at it that way. All right. So when we start looking at survey stuff, basically what you start looking at is counts of things, asking people about counts of things or self-reported activities. And again, frequency or counts, how many people that they know or how many people are involved in these kinds of things. You can go in perceptions and attitudes, victimization surveys, general surveys, that kind of thing. And evaluation, all kinds of purposes. Types of question, open-ended versus closed-ended. Most of them are closed-ended. Every survey that you've taken, usually the open-ended ones are, do you have any response, anything you'd like to add in at the end, any places where it lets you type in actual words. Those are your open-ended responses. That allows for any type of response to come in. That's completely unstructured. Your closed-ended questions are the ones that are going to be structured. Those are going to be, they'll take a wide variety of shapes. What do I say here? In terms of, it mentions Likert. You guys have heard Likert before, yes? Anytime that you have the word Likert, a Likert item is any scale that will do something like the following. Like it's usually something like attitudes or preferences, and you'll have a few different points, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can go up to 10. You can give it 3 or 4. And basically what it is, it'd be like varying somewhat. 3 is yes or no. 4 is somewhat. 5 is very. And it'll be like, okay, this one's negative, this one's negative, this one's positive, this one's positive. Right? And so you end up with a scale that's interval in nature, or at least ordered in nature. We can say, this is worse than this one. Right? Or this one is better than this one. And so you got that relationship in there. You can start to pull that out. And so because it's set up like this, you can start to treat it like those distances have meaning again, because there's so many divisions here. All right. Okay. And so as you're making questions, the first thing you decide is, what is it you're trying to capture? Is it something that's already structured? Is it something you're trying to capture, something brand new? Likert scales are very useful. Big things about it is, hey, when you ask questions, form matters. Like we talked about that before. That kind of stuff. It's going to talk about that. Avoid negative, avoid bias, and other things. Like when you start setting up questions, sometimes your questions lead to other questions, right? You're asking questions about victimization. Okay. Were you a victim to a robbery in the last year? Yes. Okay. Is there anything else you want to know, or you just want to know yes? There's a lot of things I'd want to know, right? If you look at the NIBRs or anything like that, what you start seeing in there in terms of is the offender known? Is that, what's the relationship here? Was there a weapon used? That kind of thing. If it's a survey and you're not anything official, you'd want to ask, was this reported? That kind of thing. And so that's where contingency questions will pop in. That if I answer a specific way, a new question will come up to kind of give me a better resolution image there. For example, if I asked that question about sexual orientation, and if I said hetero, homo, or other, and someone clicks the other, what does that mean? You're gonna have to ask another question. It says, okay, please specify. Because if you don't, I have no idea what that means, and I might as well just remove you from the survey. Right? And so that's how that's going to work. Matrix questions. Those are very useful for those Likert items, right? So if I've got a whole bunch of items that are going to be the same structure, like how frequently do you take your vitamins? Not, right? Not frequently, not not very frequently. Not, this one you just say not frequently. Neutral, somewhat frequently, very frequently, something like that, right? And so if you had your vitamins here, you eat breakfast, you work out, whatever it is you're trying to measure here. You've got a few of these questions that have that same framework. You set them up like a little grid. And so the person just has to go through and click the little button for whatever it is that they want. As you do that, it makes it go much, much faster. As you're designing these things, you have to keep in mind, not only does the wording of the question matter, the ordering of the question matters. So you can affect one response to a question by the questions you ask in advance. Think of it this way. If I'm going to ask about your perceptions of, let's do it this way. Your perceptions of policing, right? And I ask that just baseline. Right? I could start out with that. If I wanted to create a negative bias, I'd have you start listing out all the instances that you've ever received any type of ticket or negative interaction with police officers. What's going to happen after that is your responses will start to go biased because you're already in that frame set, that mindset where it's negative, right? Some effective question order, perhaps devise more than one version. These are ways to address it. And with dollar demographic data. That's actually kind of an interesting one because there was a time period where that was kind of a good argument. You should put your demographic data at the end rather than the beginning, okay? And so if you're thinking about designing a survey, you're going to need that demographic data. That's your control. You're going to need that to be able to determine the more accurate effect sizes for the other things that you're measuring. Because at the end of your survey, attrition's a thing, right? People take your survey, they've been taking, let's say it's only a 15-minute survey. They got bored, they closed out. They never come back. This essential information you no longer get. That's just a wasted record, right? You can't use it anymore because the stuff that you're going to need to be able to analyze it with the controls aren't there. So sometimes you'll put those at the beginning. Typically, I think most usually do put the demographic stuff at the beginning, but somebody put it at the end, just depending on length, format, and those kinds of things. Those are different decision points you can make. They have big effects. I think this next one's where they talk about, self-administered questionnaires. I'm not going to talk about that too much. You can read about that because they also have that, mailing, and that kind of stuff. What you need to think about is okay, if we're talking about the questions that you have here, your responses matter, the questions themselves, the ordering matters. Okay, we're kind of walking backwards here. What else will matter? Your approach, right? So from the get-go, it's like there's multiple ways you can conduct a survey, whether it's this will list out, in person, online, via mail, through any number of things. We have that initial contact. That right there sets the initial stage. Let's say if you're doing this via email, what's going to be the first thing that you need to do if you're going to reach out to someone? Now, that's up by informed consent. That's where you start. I'm going to start describing in this email. It's like, okay, here's what we've got going on. Here's what the topics are. Here's what would be required of you. Is this something that you want to involve yourself in? Is there that voluntary? Do you make sure that this is voluntary, that they know it's voluntary, that kind of stuff. As you move from that, it's like, here, there's your cover letter. Could be that email, that kind of thing. When you do it, they need to know it's legitimate. Otherwise, they're going to discard it. Okay. As you're doing this, you're sending out these invites. You're going to have some complete, incomplete, and non-starters. Right? The idea is we want as many people to complete this as we can, right? We've just gone through all the steps of, we got a sampling frame, we determined how we're going to sample them. Now we're sending out the invites to actually get the data from them. And now we don't know whether or not they're gonna actually do the work, right? And so this is something that as you're doing this, you can monitor this to see what the response rate is, depending on the system you're dealing with. You might have to schedule in more prompts to remind people, have a time frame associated with this, and then have a set frame for, what is the response rate we're looking for. Here it says 50 is adequate, 60 is good, 70 is very good. Like, okay. Those are very, very good response rates. Do a survey. It's like, I've never seen a survey where you actually get that. Like, usually it's if you're conducting a survey, it's much lower. Here it mentions a few other formats right here. So let's say if you were to do a survey by, first thing you deal with, topic. And so we're running with the one that I played with a little bit, that's fear. And so if we're going to deal with that, start with, where would you start? We're going to run a project on fear. It's the first thing we need to talk about. Do this. Concepts, propositions, those types of things. Start with concepts first. What are we studying? What we want, right? So this is one. Fear on campus, that kind of thing. Okay. Shift over to our sample. And we'll build in the framework here in a second. Okay, where are we at?
Campus.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a location. What are our populations?
Students.
Okay. What else?
Professors and faculty.
Yeah. What else?
WE.
Chat thing up here. I can't see. That's fine. Kick me out. Certainly. Ooh. No, wait, that's rough. Well, I'll post this up online later too. So if you have connectivity issues, let me know. You can break it out that way, students, faculty, staff. Usually you can combine those down to employees or something like that. All right, so you have at least right off the bat, two separate populations, right? Do you want to deal with both of them, one of them, that kind of a thing? What's nice about this is you start talking about that frame. Can we get a frame for that, for those lists? Where we have a full list of all the people who meet the requirements to be members of this group. Yeah. Cool. All right. Next up. It's talking about come. So we'll just keep on with that for the next. We only have 2 more minutes before we start moving into a different topic. So do this. Ooh. What all do I want to jump into? Because there's a few different points where you can jump off of this. Okay, so here as a concept, usually there's about 3 parts they look at here. There's the perception, emotion, and behavior. For this one, I was interested in how people are moving on campus as a result of their fear. And so if you're thinking about how people move across campus, how did you guys get on campus today?
We drove.
Okay, so some driving. So whenever you got here, it's just kind of like, were you driving or someone else driving? You just kind of bail out. That's always a cool way to go. Things like parking lots, right? You have the different buildings you go into, that kind of thing, different services you use. Any number of things you can look at. I took this one in kind of a geographic directions, like locations, buildings they were using across different time frames. And what I'll do is we'll kind of draft out some questions like that, see what you guys would have asked if you're trying to get it. And I'll show you what I did, so that way you can kind of see that structure and how, with those different concepts, you put numbers to it and start pulling out information. Cool. All right. Well, we are out of time. That's the bell. All right. Well, you guys take care. Have a great day. And if you need anything, let me know. Bye.